Hey guys, if as you notice, I am recording on the vodcast style versus the edited video. So this is live and it is raw. And I also want to note that I actually just spent the last 47 minutes recording this video and editing it, or sorry, attempting to edit it after I got it all done. And I actually didn't have my mic on. So this is my second take live and raw to go through everything. Um, Anyway, yesterday you would have read two documents. The first was Gospel of Wealth, and the second was just our standard text about the industrial problems. You had questions attached to those, but the most important thing from yesterday was the short response questions that was attached to the Gospel of Wealth. Um, please complete those if you haven't already. This is heavily weighted. Anyway, today, of course, we're going to be covering industrial problems in PA, and this chapter in section tends to just briefly go over this time period, such as the Gilded Age, the Industrial Era, and the Progressive Era. But this is a super interesting and super important time. I think most history teachers think it's a boring time, so it's kind of like skipped over because why not get into World War One, right? It's more exciting. But I'm going to spend some time on it for you guys because I think it's super interesting. When we think of the term gilded in general, what it means is a thin layer of gold. And from our last lesson, you can remember that Pennsylvania and a bunch of wealthy individuals made like an extreme, immense, vast amount of wealth, right? Like more than countries today, more than most countries today. So you can squint your eyes and say, this is a great time. Look at Andrew Carnegie, but that's just not true, or at least it's not true in representing most people and how they had it. So there's plenty of problems at this time, and we're going to take a look at that, right? Now, on that note, let's look at the bell ringer. From the top of your heads, or from what you remember in reading or the U.S. history classes you might have had before, what were some examples of the problems and the corruption during this time period in the late 1800s and the early 1900s? Number two, how do these problems compare to the problems we have today in society? Can you list some of the problems that we have today? And I'll even give you a bonus point if you can list some of the solutions that you have to these current problems, since we don't want to get too dark and gloomy just talking about the problems. That's easy, but solutions, they're hard. So what do you got? Tell me. So now take some time, pause the video, think about the questions, and then answer them in comments on Google Classroom. All right? Thanks, guys. So let's get into our objectives for today and tomorrow. Also, will just be describing the problems and the corruption during the industrial era. We'll go over quite a few things, but today we're specifically going to focus on immigration and working conditions. So let's talk about immigration. There we go. So PA's population was pretty much growing 1 million per 10 years or so at that time. We had enormous growth. Immigrants were coming in from many nations such as Greece or Ireland or Hungary, Italy, Turkey, Poland, and many other places. Now, why they come has to do with push and pull factors. A push factor would be the reason that one might be migrating and may not want to stay in his or her homeland. An example of this is perhaps a civil war. That might push you out. A better real world example for what's going on would be with the Irish that had what they called the Great Starvation, or sometimes it's even referred to as the Irish Genocide, where millions died and migrated out of Ireland, and it all could have been prevented by the English government, which later, again in 1996, you get Prime Minister Tony Blair apologizing for it. Anyway, sometimes it's referred to as the Irish potato famine, but that's not really accurate, and some true Irish would say that's very offensive, because it's not as if they only had potatoes to eat and ran out because of blight. It's a common misconception, and even when you say like famine, it's like there was food, there's plenty of food, so it was a starvation, it was a genocide. So they see it totally different, and if you're curious on that, I can send you some sources. Again, super interesting. Anyway, a pull factor is something in the land that might be appealing or bringing somebody there. Like, why would I want to go to the US? Well, maybe you hear about the story of Andrew Carnegie and the perceived opportunities that Pennsylvania has. He was a poor boy, and then he would become the richest man on the planet. Or even you can go to the US because it's a land of wizards. Thomas Edison, that was his name, like the Wizard of Menlo Park. He's lighting up cities, it's lit. But that wasn't the case most times. You're not going to be this technological genius always. Maybe you won't be Tesla. Maybe you won't be Andrew Carnegie. Many times immigrants faced great challenges, even just finding work. And maybe when they got employment, it was mostly just as an unskilled laborer, such as unloading cargo or ditch digging. Maybe you worked in a steel mill, maybe you worked in a mine, or even building railroads. They didn't get fantastic jobs right out of the gate, and most times the pay wasn't great. Living conditions weren't great. Working conditions weren't great. And I keep saying not great, but what I should probably say is just they were bad. However, this is what they had, and if they didn't take some of these opportunities, they would quickly be replaced and then have absolutely nothing. So many at that time, especially later when unions would form and protests began, would actually refer to this as wage slavery. Of course, you know and I know, and even back then they knew it was better than actual slavery, of course, but it all too often would resemble many of the components. When they did arrive, most would arrive on the East Coast, arriving in New York. There we go. And they were greeted by the Statue of Liberty. However, for PA, many would land in Philadelphia, which, Pennsylvania's Ellis Island. It even sometimes be referred to as Immigrant City. Germans and the Irish accounted for almost 75% of the immigrants coming in to Philadelphia at this time, but there's plenty of other groups and in great numbers, such as Russians or Jews, Italians, Polish, and so on. Later, immigration would decline in Philadelphia, and just because it became cheaper to just go to New Jersey or even go to, here it is again, New York. Why not go to these places? It's cheaper than if you do want to go to Philadelphia, if you do want to go to Pittsburgh, if you want to go anywhere in PA, you can just travel by land. Plenty of these places that were, even described as immigrant cities, local to us would be Scranton or Johnstown, or even Shenandoah. And in all these places, about 1 in 4 of the residents were immigrants. When they did arrive, they would be examined in centers to get records on where they came from, their previous job, information maybe on their relatives that are actually in the U.S., or just general information about them. They also had health exams, and they would often make sure, especially in Philadelphia, that there weren't any illnesses that they were bringing in that could potentially spread. And you guys should know that Philadelphia had its own controversy with disease in Philadelphia, such as the yellow fever epidemic. So many of those coming in were actually young men who traveled alone, and then later maybe family members came, or sometimes you actually get even entire villages coming and following maybe a young man or a few that come, and they call that chain migration. When the immigrants did find homes or employment, there we go. Oftentimes they kept to themselves or their own group in their own neighborhood or their own community. For example, you get Italian neighborhoods, maybe called Little Italies. You get Irish neighborhoods. Locally, you can think of JRs and Irish Isles, Max Hoagies, like in that area. It'd be like an Irish neighborhood. Many times, some of the new immigrant groups would segregate themselves for many different reasons, and one could maybe be safety. Especially for those that didn't take too kindly to immigrants of another group. Another would be familiarity or comfort with people from a similar place with the same language and customs and traditions and holidays and so on, right? Many would assimilate though, or what that means is join into the new culture. So they could, start to buy into the American culture, but they could still hold on to many of the aspects of their own culture at that same time, such as, again, traditions or holidays and other things that you guys really love today. If you even think of like Halloween or Christmas, if you think of Valentine's Day and St. Patrick's Day and so on, we get so much of what we do from immigrants because we are a very heavy immigrant country. Some in the U.S. would, however, resent these immigrants. And there's plenty of circumstances of this, of the tensions, of the xenophobia, and some arguments back then, and you still hear the stuff today, and you heard it before I even talked about this time period. But, immigrants, they would be driving wages down, They would take away jobs. Again, sound familiar? Later, the government just starts banning certain groups, such as the Chinese or the Japanese. And then later, because that doesn't really apply to PA, right? That's on the West Coast. Later, Congress would pass literacy requirements for immigrants. So that would curve numbers to stop everybody coming in the same number. Now, like some of the poor treatment we've discussed before with people based on a group, we see this with these new immigrants. Many do stick to their communities, but discrimination still is common. Discrimination just meaning the unequal treatment because of the group's identity. There was common fears against the Irish, the Italians, the Catholics in general as an overseas danger that might ruin the U.S. and ruin society. Like if you take a look, this isn't an alligator or a crocodile. I believe it's a bishop or a pope. That's the garb and the robe and the hat, right? And they're coming overseas to the U.S. They're a danger to our society, our neighborhoods, our children, of course, our women. Why are they going to serve the president of the United States, or are they going to serve the Pope? Some foreign leader. Why can't their kids go to public school? Why do they have to go to their own private schools and so on? So there were great fears of the immigrants as being like an overseas menace coming. Here's another image. So again, this is more so like Catholics or Irish or Italians. This is more so just focused on Irish, where you get these very very I guess you could say stereotypical and racist caricatures that are definitely offensive. This is Uncle Sam, so the U.S. personified, a symbol of our country, and it shows them as just totally devouring it. So they're not good for us. But even so, the Chinese in this image would be even worse and a thief. Now, this isn't just all posters and newspaper stuff. Like things actually happen with these tensions, such as nativist riots. This is where plenty of Irish homes and even Catholic churches would be burned to the ground, people injured and dead, and it was very brutal. So again, it's not like people are just fearful and making mean pictures. Things happen. Maybe it's something subtle, like again, I gave the example before, being refused a cup of coffee. Maybe it's being refused a job. No Irish need apply, which is common. A bunch of my PA history students, you guys actually bring this stuff to me, which is really interesting. And now what you get with these new groups of immigrants, well, it's just like the old ones. They're just getting in line to the other ones. More negative sentiment and xenophobia. And at this time, they don't learn their lesson. They have to get their new boogeyman. Now, a good question to you to ask yourself today is, do we still have a new boogeyman for our time, for, the 2020s? Will we just be another chapter in history just adding to this? Who is the boogeyman? And if we do have one, is it legitimate? Is it not? Things to ask yourself and reflect on. All right. Anyway, not a new group, but the original group in PA still had issues during this era, and I want to make sure that we keep track and don't forget these people. What begins in PA and other states is a campaign called Kill the Indians, Save the Man. PA and other states, what they do is set up these boarding schools for the natives. Some describe this as cultural genocide. They have to give up all of their beliefs and their language, everything else, because it's savage, and they have to now speak English and worship a Protestant God and dress in whatever I guess is mainstream for the majority group. Now the PA school that we have is Carlisle School. This would be the crest, so it would be in Carlisle, PA. And you guys should know one of its most famous students and probably one of the best athletes to ever come out of PA, maybe the U.S., Jim Thorpe. I'll skip the details, but you really have to check out his record as a professional sportsman. It's absolutely insane. And maybe this could be one of the topics for your project at Chapter 6 that we're going to be doing soon. And one last thing on groups. We had another one at this time that we previously discussed that we still want to keep in mind. African Americans. That stuff didn't go away. The fight for civil rights is still going on in PA. Remember Jim Crow PA? We had a whole lesson on it. So now let's take a look at working conditions. And I will try to hurry. I know I'm like 15 minutes in. To start, the hours and the days were horrific, especially when we see what we have today. They'd often work 6 days, maybe more, in 12 to 16-hour days as well. Sometimes you get kids going in at 2 a.m. and they don't get done till 8 p.m. You didn't have days off, there's no holidays, and many times you didn't even get a lunch break or you had to eat while you work. Now, some owners would give a break, sometimes even an hour break, so it just depends. Often you hear workers talking about how they don't even see the sun based on their hours, and they did have extremely low pay, and many times they'd even have to go into debt in some of the worst company towns, and this is something we've touched on before. Conditions were extremely dangerous, such as in mines and factories, on railroads, on steel mills, and in sweatshops. Machines had no safety covers or fences. Iron workers were often burned and regularly worked in 130-degree or more working environments each day. Accidents and deaths, super common occurrence. For women and kids that worked in the mills and the factories, they faced dusty, dirty, dark conditions, but maybe they had a couple windows the sun could get in. They'd run machines powered by steam engines, so often their work was also filled with smoke. Many ended up, because of that, having real issues with their eyes and sight and even their lungs. We call these places sweatshops, and they're crowded, dangerous, unhealthy. You don't have breaks. And women were also subject to abuse, and that was common. And you can use your imagination for what types as well. Owners didn't really have regulations at this time, and even later when they're created, they're just widely ignored. You have to remember that with this class or my civics class, we get these laws, or even when you get amendments such as 15th Amendment or 13th, whatever, they don't mean anything unless they're enforced and enforced properly. So even when you do get later, we'll ban child labor or this or that, well, it only means something if it's, again, enforced properly. Owners would often use kids or even women because it was cheaper. You have all this machinery doing much of the work, and it often doesn't require much skill. So I have at least one account of a 5-year-old operating machinery. Maybe there's only one in our history, but I at least know that at one point in our history, a 5-year-old was operating machinery and working. And why not, right? You don't have to pay them as much. You could pay them half or maybe even a quarter as much as you pay men. We even have accounts of family members fighting internally because of this, over wages and jobs. Kids in mines would often work without candles if the family was too poor to, go in debt to go get these candles at the company-owned store. Many times they're also beaten by miners, for instance, if they fell asleep on the job. Some young girls had to pull sledges or carts with coal all day, and that led to plenty of bodily issues, and they'd even have childbirth issues later in life. In fact, for boys and girls, they had health issues and problems later. For instance, it probably led to generations of people being shorter than they actually should have been and shorter comparison to other children. Anyway. Everyone was extremely replaceable, and everybody kind of functioned as a cog at this time. If you got injured or missed work or anything else, they'd just replace you. There was plenty of other workers. We have a giant population of immigrants coming in, so you weren't special. You were replaceable, and we didn't have any unions or bargaining power at this time either. Even when you get unions, or at least at first when we get unions, you're just banned or blocked or blacklisted. You just wouldn't work. So unions at first weren't extremely effective. Later they are, but we're not there yet. Remember, if you did get hurt, your wages stopped, and if you couldn't return in the same capacity, again, you're just fired and they'll get somebody else. There wasn't any medical assistance or anything like that. But maybe your boss would give you a day off or 2 days off. Or I read one account, a guy's son died, so he got a day or two off work, and I believe the boss paid for a third or maybe half of the funeral costs. So it all just depends, but it's not great at all. I keep saying not great. Okay, it's bad. It's very bad, guys. Overall, this work was fast-paced and focused on production. No chit-chat allowed. Don't talk. Let's be productive. Let's do the same, mindless task 5,000 times a day. And you also literally had tens of thousands of on-the-job deaths each year. maybe sometimes 75,000 deaths, or maybe on average later when you get closer to 1900, something like 35,000 deaths. That's very bad. Now, before I wrap up, because I know, again, I'm at like 20 minutes, I'm taking too long. Um, I wanted to take you through a Department of Labor's report in 1900. And a quick note on this, oh, I don't think you can see it. Great. Let me move this quick. This is from the Department of Labor. It's super interesting. I can send you some of this stuff if you'd like. A quick note is that this is 1900. So this is not 1840 or 1850 or 1860 or 1870 or 1880 or 1890, which was undoubtedly much worse, with things probably unreported or underreported. Like, this is when things are starting to get better. So this is from 1900. So let's take a look at this, and just give you a break from me just dumping information on you. So here's some images and just a couple quotes from it. To start, the steel industry produced some of the most violent accidents in Butler, PA. Sorry, some of the most violent accidents later in Butler, PA. A heavy pot of hot metal spilled. Streams of hot metal poured down on the workmen, engulfing and literally cooking some of them. Because of this steel accident, you get 4 dead and 30 more injured, and the explosion that took place literally shook the town. Now, this report goes on to say, this was one extreme circumstance, but they also list many other extreme circumstances with people in coffin plants, getting caught in machinery. And the report is actually very detailed, and I went back and forth in my head. Should I give you the details? Should I not? Well, I have the report. I can share the report with you, but for this video, I'm not going to do the details because some of the more extravagant ones have to do with kids, and it's something out of a Saw movie. And this Department of Labor report is like very meticulous. They give you the little details. So I'm going to skip that stuff for you guys. But, if we're talking about a coffin plant, it's dangerous. People getting caught in machinery, they're dying. If we're talking about a brick making factory in PA, again, they're dying. Their skin's getting ripped off. If you're talking about a sawmill, well, there you go. There's not really an explanation that I need to give, because you guys can use your common sense how that works there. Even power plants where you have like giant turbines or large wheels, sometimes catching somebody and throwing them, maybe 50 feet, 100 feet. Again, you know what's going to happen. Even in Philadelphia, there's a really bad accident at a caramel, like a candy factory, a caramel factory. Again, this is one of the most brutal ones with a kid, so I'm just going to skip it. But this report has a ton of good information that's very eye-opening at the time. It concluded that at this time, 1 in 10 people were injured at work. And basically that stat and all the other stats doubles whenever you're an immigrant. Maybe this has to do with language barriers or something else, but the report goes on to say that 30% of accidents that happen and we're talking tens of thousands, by the way, tens of thousands of accidents, tens of thousands of deaths, sorry. This report says that 30% of the accidents were solely the employer's fault. So almost a third are, this is just your boss. About 44%, so almost half, were the boss and the workers. So, and then lastly, 26% were just the worker's fault. So just over a quarter, the worker might have been careless, or maybe the worker's inexperienced. Now, once this report did come out, it did shake some people. Some businesses would do their part to make sure things were better and improve, but plenty of others didn't. They just went on, as before. One business to note in PA that did do the right thing, and they actually spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, which would equate to, millions today, but was Pennsylvania steel industry. They did try to make things better and make things safe for the worker. So super interesting and worth noting. Now, a few more photos before I finish today. This report would also read, I'm just reading quotes, "The air was so thick with coal dust that it was hard to see, and the sharp edges of the anthracite often cut the fingers on small hands. These breaker boys, who worked 6 days a week sorting the coal, earned only a fraction of what adults were paid, and all too often lost hands or feet in grinding gears or developed, quote unquote, the cough. In addition to breaker boys, other children worked as greasers, carrying buckets of grease to pour into the gears of machinery, and spragglers, who stood on the railways and struck sticks in the wheel of the coal cars to slow them down. So, again, long hours, long weeks, the cough, they're all cut up, beat up, and you can just take a look at their hours. Like, they don't see the sun. This is extremely screwed up. Here's another one. This 13-year-old from Pennsylvania, I can't remember his last name, first name Neil. He lost his leg after a chain or a rope broke, and this was super common back then. You also have other things that are super common, like maybe a cave-in. Every once in a while you get a fire or explosion. You have deadly gas all the time. Flooding also would occur here and there. So extremely brutal conditions. And again, we've got kids doing this, and kids doing it at, again, 2 a.m. to 8 p.m. And this might be 6 days a week, maybe longer depending. So very, very brutal. I think this is maybe the last picture I have for you guys. All right, let's wrap it up. So here's just a portion on mill and garment workers, which Pennsylvania let in, right? We're making plenty of clothes and everything else. It was much safer, but these women would be easily fired, as we said before, with these sweatshops. Very crowded, you don't have breaks. Sometimes these women might be even fired during the slow times. Wages were poor, there's no socializing. They did use kids pretty heavily in these industries. And sometimes, like other industries, they were even charged to even use some of the tools. So it's like you're going to work and you're actually in debt for going to work to make money for yourself, but you can't because you're in debt and then you're making somebody else money. It's like the perfect scheme. Anyway, I'm going to stop there for today. I did cover a lot, and I just wanted to get you guys or show you guys a glimpse of what life was for workers back then and immigrants. In the mid to late 1800s and even in the early 1900s, there's a lot of issues. That's why they call it the Gilded Era, or the Gilded Age, sorry, because it seems all great, but it's depends on who you're talking about. So we're going to continue this tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any questions, if you want to see any of my resources or the labor report or anything like that. Okay, it's all super interesting. Take care. Thanks for watching. And sorry I had to make the vodcast video, and sorry it's too long. All right, have a good one, guys. Let me know if you need anything. Bye.